Hey, hello. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Let's Build That App.com channel. Hope you guys are having a good day, and I hope you're doing well in the world of Swift development. Now, recently, iOS 15 was just released for public consumption, and also what's available now is Xcode 13. You can find that through the Mac OS X App Store. And so today I wanted to go through a very quick tutorial on how to use a new pattern that's now available in Xcode 13 and iOS 15. And as you can see through the title of the video, the pattern is the async await pattern. And if we have enough time today, we'll also work on async images. Okay, so the goal of today's video is to build out this application here. And, it's a very simple app. It's going to hit a JSON endpoint and consume a couple of JSON objects that we can, present inside of a vertical list like this. Again, nothing too fancy. And it looks like this right here. I'm going to hit the refresh. It's going to hit the endpoint one more time and fetch the data. And once we have it, we are rendering our async images here. And also, some string properties on our JSON object. Okay, so, that's basically what we are going to work on in today's video. And again, we're going to be performing all of these operations using the new async await pattern. Hopefully, I remember how to do this inside of Xcode 13. The code is a little bit new to me still, but, hopefully I can present it in an easy to understand manner. All right, so what do we want to do here is I am going to go ahead and use my Xcode project, which is right here. And I don't exactly want to use this built out project. So what I will do is I'm going to create a new one using Command-Shift-N to create a new project here. This guy, hopefully you guys can see my screen. I'm going to use the iOS app like this. It looks a little bit different, but we should be okay. Async await pattern and create your project. These settings should be fine. Hit next and just save this inside of your computer somewhere and you should be okay. Hopefully this is going to create with no problem whatsoever. I'm on my Mac Mini M1 right now. Go ahead and change this to the iPhone Pro Max and just slide that guy over. I don't really need the documentation panel on the right edge, so here is what I have. All right, I'm going to slide this guy in the back out of the way, and I will, maximize this as large as I can. All right, so here we go. We have our Xcode editor. Again, this is Xcode 13. It looks quite a bit different compared to Xcode 12, but nonetheless, this is what we'll be working in. Now, for the right side preview, what you want to do is to hit play. You can start typing things inside of your code here. 1, 2, 3, you'll see your changes reflect automatically on the right side. And the first thing we will do is to make sure we have a navigation view. This makes our code look a little bit nicer. I'm going to include a scroll view as well. And here is my scroll view. And that's what we have. So I don't care about that text stuff. I'm going to go down below here and use navigation title. And we'll say courses like this. And again, this is what we're trying to work towards. Okay, so next thing we want to look at is to actually fetch our JSON data. And the question is, where exactly is our JSON data going to come from? Well, I'm going to open up a Chrome browser. And I will paste in my code and just drag it inside of the screen here. Hopefully you guys can see exactly what's going on, but basically when you hit this endpoint here, let me just maximize this a little larger. You'll get this list of JSON data. I'm using a JSON parser renderer for the Chrome browser, and that's why it's kind of nicely formatted like so. But here is our JSON endpoint. I'll provide this link down below so that you guys can use it as you see fit. But here is our properties: ID, name, link, image URL, and number of lessons. The images right here are coming from the image URL. So, some of you guys already know how to do some of this using the traditional completion block handlers. But today's lesson, we're going to be using async await. So I'll show you exactly how to do that right now. First thing you want to do is to create some kind of like what they call a view model object. And I'll just call this the content view model. You want to conform to the observable object. This is a protocol, I believe. And inside of here, just use something like init, and fetch data will occur here. Okay, that is looking pretty good. And the first thing I want to do is I want to take this content view model, right? I'm going to go down below, and to use this view model, you want to observe it using either, I believe, a state object or an observed object works as well. We'll just use this in the video. So content view model, construct a new instance of this guy. And the moment that you do that, right, you can enter whatever properties you want inside of this view model object, like is fetching, and just set this to false or, some kind of Boolean. And, maybe you want to use a true instead. And down below, instead of your content view guy, you can just monitor your publish variable. So if is fetching, and we'll do this right here. So this is VM, your view model is fetching, and we'll just say text is fetching data from internet. So, obviously you can type in whatever you want. And I'm going to hit Command Option P on my keyboard to resume the preview on the right side. Okay, so here is what we get. I will remove that text for now. And it is fetching data from internet. That's happening because the is fetching is true. So what you can do instead is, let's say you set this guy equal to false, right? And instead of here, you can do something like dispatch queue and async. Let's see, main.async after, like this, using this deadline. And I'll just type out some code, and I'll use 1 second from now, hit enter here. And let's say self that is fetching equals to true. All right, so what that is going to do is it's going to start up our application right here. And after 1 second, so deadline now, 1 second from now, after that specified amount of time, we are going to, modify the is fetching to true. If I hit a space bar right here, it's going to refresh. So let's hit the resume. The is fetching is false at the very beginning, and after 1 second, your text string right here is now being rendered out. So that's kind of the usefulness of this view model type of object. And the other useful aspect of a view model is you can put all of your fetching code inside of your view model. It doesn't really matter where you put it. What you can do is you can create a new function, and you can say fetch data like so. Maybe you want to make it private. You can do that as well. All right, next we are going to move on to consuming our JSON data. Let me see. I want to say URL string equals the string that we parsed out in the browser. And so again, this URL string is going to be available in the description below. Make sure you copy and paste it and use it. Otherwise, you won't be able to get the data. All right, so with this URL string, what do I want to do with it? I might want to close out of that guy, get some more space here. So for the URL string, right, I'm going to use the guard and let URL equals this URL using the string from the URL string right here. And I'm just going to return. You might want to provide yourself with some kind of error message, but today's tutorial, it's kind of out of scope to talk about error messages. So I'll just leave this for now. Next thing I will do is I'm going to say URL session like so, and you can say shared. And this is the interesting part of today's lesson. Typically when you are, fetching data from the internet using URL session, you might just want to use this data task with the completion handler. So, either one of these, maybe this one right here. This is what you would consider the, old traditional style of data fetching. And instead of iOS 15 and Xcode 13, you can now use the download data method. And I'll show you what this looks like right here. So shared, and I believe it's one of these methods below. So hopefully you guys can see the pop-up right here. You'll see data for data from and for. This for one takes in a request. From this just takes in a URL and a optional delegate. You see on the right side, it says async, and it potentially throws you an error. There's a lot more to talk about, but it's actually really easy to use. So I will do that here. Paste in the URL and the delegate. You can either use nil like so, or if you don't want to see it, just wipe it away. All right, the next question is whenever you execute this shared data from URL, right? You can see there's a lot of potential errors and problems that can occur. And one thing that you have to check is whether or not your OS is running iOS 15. And you can do that using this check right here, using this fix like so. And this is fine, but I'd rather just make my application iOS 15 targeted. I guess in other words, you want to go through your project settings here, and I'm just going to target the iOS 15 development environment, and that should make my error go away. So once I have that, you can see that your iOS 15 error is now gone, and you can look at the other messages inside of Xcode. So the first message you want to kind of tackle here is that these async methods, they require you to use an await like that. And that's pretty much just going to wait for the data to come back from the internet. And then the next thing you'll do is these functions right here, right? They can throw an error if, let's say, that you can't reach your URL endpoint here. So what you want to do is you want to catch this inside of a do catch block like so. And we'll catch it, and we'll just say print and fail to reach and reach endpoint like that. And you can just use the interpolation of the error like so. Some of you guys might be asking where this error is coming from, but basically instead of a do catch like this is the implicit error variable that gets caught inside of this do catch. Okay, the next thing you'll need to do is you are going to have to try the awaiting of your data fetch here as well. And once you do that, the Xcode compiler will stop compiling about things, hopefully. And once you do that, everything should be okay. You'll see the last couple of error messages that you're kind of shown here is to kind of tackle this async call in a function that does not support concurrency. And what this really means is when you're awaiting an async function like this data guy right here, so hit option and click on this guy, you'll see the documentation. It's async and it throws. So in order to call an await function, you want to make sure that the function itself, which is such data, this guy also needs to be async. And once you have that, that error will go away and everything should be fine at the moment. The last warning, this is just a warning, is that the data I get back from this actual call, it's actually not being used at all. So you can do this right here, let data, and I think it's the response of your await is going to be captured inside of this tuple on the left of data and response. So, that's fine. And the last thing I will do is I am going to print out the data like so. All right, the last thing I will have to do is to actually invoke this fetch data method call. And I need to do that from somewhere inside of my view so that I can, present it inside of my app. And there's a couple of ways of doing this. I'm going to remove the private so that it's exposed. And then the next thing is to just go inside of here, and I believe the view modifier that you want to call it is just task right here. And it says adds an asynchronous task to perform when this view appears. And just click on that and we'll see the VM of fetch data. You see it's an async function, and we'll click on that and everything should be fine. You'll see that if you click on the fix, you'll have the await here as well. Let's try to resume this one more time. Everything is looking pretty good. You see the is fetching from data or data from internet. And the last thing I want to do is I'm going to run this application inside of the iPhone Pro Max simulator there. And what that'll do is it's going to invoke the fetch data when the view appears. And once that happens, it's going to fetch my data from the URL string. And then at the very bottom, we are printing out the data. And you'll see the data is 2073 bytes. And again, that's going to represent all of the data right here. So there's about 2,000 characters is what I assume. Now, the next thing I will do is to just move on to parsing this data into, some JSON objects. And the easiest way of doing that is to just create a struct, and we'll call this the course and make it decodable like that. Hopefully I spelled that correctly. And then lastly, I'm going to use the name as a string, and let's just use the ID of a string as well. And I'm just basically looking at all of these properties here. So we have the ID, name, and link. Let's see, I believe this is the link, image URL, and I think that's okay. The ID looks like a string. So the ID is a string, or the ID is an integer rather. So what I'll do is I'll specify it as an int and also a number of lessons. So, just standard JSON decodable properties. And once I have that, I think I should be good to go. All right, for the course object, I'm going to use it instead of my JSON decoding right here. And again, this is pretty easy. I am going to use the let courses equals the JSON decoder and decode it using the array of course, like so. And then we have the data right there. All right, so not bad, not bad. You'll see this warning complaining about the response not being used, right? So one easy fix to get rid of that is to use an underscore like so. For the JSON decoder, you have to try the actual decoding, otherwise it's not going to work, and everything should look kind of fine. For this right here, I'm going to just say print out the courses. And I'm going to rerun this with Command R. It's going to fire this guy up, and you'll see all of the courses being rendered out here. And it's just a very long list of data. You'll see this async await pattern.course, which is my course object. And all of my properties are being kind of captured inside of my JSON object, which is this right here. All right, that's basically how you perform your data fetch. And lastly, you are going to want to render out this guy inside of your view, right? So for example, the image, the text below. How do you do that? Well, this is just, standard SwiftUI object rendering. I'll create a variable that's published and call it courses equals the course. And let's just, construct a new array like that. Next, I will simply replace this code right here and say self.courses. And you don't really need to print the courses, so I'll just remove that. And let's see, next we have inside of our scroll view, I'm going to use this. I guess I'll use a for each. You can use a list if you want, but this is what I'll use. I'm going to say vm.courses, and I will use course in and text, and let's see, course.name. Now, I don't believe this will work because the course object doesn't conform to this identifiable protocol. And let me just kind of fix that now. I'm going to simply use identifiable. Whenever you conform your objects to identifiable, it expects you to have some kind of ID property on your object. And just, conveniently for us, our JSON objects contains our ID. So this is safe to do. And then next, you are going to want to just resume your code. I'm just hitting Command Option P. And once you do that, you'll see your data is now kind of being rendered out here. This is just simply the name of my courses, right? Lastly, I guess I am going to get rid of this silliness for now. And let's see, what do I want to do here? I guess down below, right before I fetch my data, I'll toggle this guy to true. And then once everything is done, I will use is fetching equals to false. And also if the catch occurs, I'll set the fetching as false as well. Okay, that looks pretty good. Next thing is what I'm going to do here is let's use a progress view instead. And I'm going to hit resume and hopefully my code looks okay. You'll see that if I hit a space right here, you'll see the kind of spinning progress guy for just a brief moment. And once my data fetch is done, all my objects appear like so. Okay, that is the very quick lesson on how to set up a JSON fetching async await function, which is fetch data here. There's a lot of side tangential topics that we can discuss as well. For example, let's kind of go back to this line of code, the await URL session. This guy, you saw previously, we are capturing data and also the response of your, shared data call from your endpoint up here, right? What can happen is this response object. So I'm going to say if let response equals response as HTTP URL response like so. And if the status code is, I don't know, maybe greater or equal to 300, you want to capture that as an error. The status code, usually in the land of HTTP, let me just kind of fix this error here. So anything above 300, it's typically, not a success. And anything between 200 and 299, that's typically a success code. So whenever this happens, it's usually an error. And you can say something like if, self.error message equals fail to hit endpoint with bad status code. That's kind of how you would handle this response error. And somewhere up here, you might want to use publish var and error message. And just set this guy to the empty string. And, you might want to use this inside of a review when an error actually occurs. All right, so that's one very nice issue to solve. The last thing you also want to render out in your review are these images instead of SwiftUI. So with the introduction of AsncImage inside of SwiftUI, you can render out these views relatively easily. So again, there's this AsncImage now available in iOS 15. And I will use this using I believe it's the content and placeholder. So I'm not a big fan of AsncImage in its current iteration. There's a lot of issues rendering out things, and maybe I'll show you some of the issues today. The URL, you can construct it. I'm going to use this one line of code right above, and I'll use the course.image URL. And you can just simply pump this in here. For the image, I'm going to hit enter right here, and here's my image that I get back from the URL. And the next thing I will do is I'm going to say image.resizable, like so. Hopefully I can get this to work. So again, I'm not a big fan of AsncImage just yet. A lot of weird issues with the way AsncImage renders out inside of your view. So let's just hope it works for me today. Okay, so as you can see, the aspect ratio of my images, right? They're not exactly perfect just yet. I'm going to go back to my image and use scale to fill. Once I do that, hopefully my image looks perfect. So this looks quite nice. One thing that is weird about AsncImage that I can't really figure out just yet, I don't really know if it's a bug or not, but if you try to use a lazy VStack to capture all of your objects in a lazy kind of fashion, then the images, sometimes they don't render out correctly for me. So you see the images look okay. And if you're not really looking carefully, you might not notice that for this image right here, intermediate training core data, it should look like this image right here, right below the podcast. So for whatever reason, if someone knows the solution for why async images aren't being rendered out inside of a lazy VStack, please let me know. And if you get rid of the lazy and render out your entire list again, you'll see that your image actually renders out nicely. Again, not sure why that is, but if someone can enlighten me as to what the solution is, please let me know. All right, I think that's most of what I want to talk about for this super long tutorial. If you guys are interested in this refresh button here, it's really easy to hook up. Maybe I'll show that for today's video to wrap up here. All right, for the refresh button, you can go down to your scroll view, and down here somewhere, it doesn't really matter where, you can use the navigation of the trailing button, and I'll just call this the refresh button. This guy, what exactly is it? Well, I'll define it for you right here. And let's see, what do we want to call this? Private var refresh button of some view. And we will return a button that has the action, title, and label. This guy, I'll say VM dot refresh, fetch data. And this guy is the, you can just use the text of refresh like so. All right, now, once you have this code, you're going to try to run this inside of the preview or the simulator, but you'll see it doesn't exactly want to compile it just yet. And the reason is because this is an async function. And when you're inside of a button, there's nothing really allowing you to run an async method. And what you want to do is, you want to use this async style of code right here. So I'll just paste that here, and I'll just kind of try to run this. Hit this guy right here, hit the await fix, and you should be fine. I'll talk about this warning in just a little bit, but your code should be okay. This guy likes to spin for a long time. Xcode is getting buggier and buggier as we kind of progress through the years. But, nonetheless, after a while, your simulator is up and running. You'll see if I hit the refresh right here, it should trigger this refresh. You'll see it kind of bounces up and down. And that looks pretty good. You can also go up here and say vm.courses.remove all is the method. So I'll just do that. So refresh does that, and that looks pretty good. You can also add animation if you wanted to do that. And I'll just put that here and here. And once you do that, you'll see your code looks a little bit strange, but that's kind of what it does. All right. And for this refresh right here, you might want to use task init instead. It's exactly the same thing as this code right here. And once you do that, this warning should be go away. So like that, I will run this inside of the simulator. Sometimes the warnings don't go away from your Xcode until you run it inside of the simulator. And, you can hit play, or I'm really used to just hitting Command R, and you'll get your application up and running right here. So that looks pretty good. Every time you hit refresh, you get your data to come up like so. So I think that's pretty much all I wanted to discuss, but as you can see, as I scroll up, you'll see that all of your data is being fetched asynchronously, right? Hence the name async for your method. And every time you fetch things asynchronously, what that really means is that you're doing, operations on the background thread. And that's really useful so that your applications can remain functional and the user can, swipe up and down. But one thing that you have to worry about is that you want to make sure that your methods get back onto the main UI thread. So I believe the traditional way of doing this is using the main and async right here, get back on the main thread. And, this actually modifies the UI, so that's kind of why it complains. And you can try to run your code inside of the simulator, but it says that it can't really convert this code to use this dispatch queue thing. So what I would like to do instead is I'll replace this code and I'll just fix this using I believe it's the main actor like this. I can't remember exactly the syntax for this guy, but I believe that's it. We have our main actor here. And now that you run your code inside of the simulator, right, it's no longer complaining about this being worked on inside of a background thread. So this is pretty much the fix for that bit of code. The topic of actors is, quite vast in terms of understanding how async await works. So I'll, maybe talk about actors in a later video, but hopefully you found today's lesson helpful. If you guys have any questions about async and await, please let me know. I'll provide this URL for the endpoint down in the description, as well as this entire project. I'll zip it up and put a link down below as well. If you guys liked today's video, make sure to hit the thumbs up and, always consider subscribing to the channel. If you guys have any ideas for future topics, please let me know as well. And I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.